Good afternoon and welcome. Welcome to IPPSR's 22nd year in conducting the Policy Forum Series. I'm Anne Marie Schneider. I work with the Institute for Public Policy and Social Research at Michigan State University. The 2014 Rose Bowl champs. I'm just saying. This year's Rose Bowl was really great for all of the universities in Michigan, really, because they get us confused anyway, right? And just exciting for the whole state. So it's wonderful to be a part of it. We're really, really proud of our teams. Not only our football team and basketball team, but our academic teams and our faculty team as well. So in case you missed it, yes, I said that this is IPPSR's 22nd year in conducting the Public Policy Forum Series. I was there for the first one. I hope I'm not there for the last. The Institute is clearly committed to public discussion of issues facing Michigan citizens. And with IPPSR Director Dr. Roberts' support, Dr. Roberts, this to you. Whoa! He's flying around on me. Along with the encouragement of University President Luana Simon, the IPPSR Forums series have endured. And of course, if you were not here, they would not have. If they did not receive your attention, we would not be here today. So thank you for attending and supporting the forums through the years. Your attendance might mean that you appreciate a good lunch, and it might mean that you appreciate a good networking opportunity. We all need those. Or like many of you, or many people in the state, you might be looking for some clarification of some rather confusing headlines in the state of Michigan. You know, on one hand, Michigan has bankrupt or near bankrupt communities, and on the other hand, there's an argument for tax cuts. On one hand, Michigan is struggling to afford road and other infrastructure improvements to grow and attract business. And on the other hand, there is a protest for a higher minimum wage, probably not so attractive to new business. All of this to say that Michigan's challenges are complex. We can find insight in the demographics of our state for addressing these complex and often conflicting issues. When we look at Michigan's average income, are our wages competitive with other states? If education is important to us, how are we doing with high school and college degrees? What are we doing to bring the higher paying jobs to the state? So what kinds of jobs do we provide here? Do they attract young people? Do they keep skilled people in our state? We're fortunate to have two impressive and very well-informed speakers here to help us look into Michigan demographics and make some sense of what they tell us about the economic outlook and our state priorities. So where we are, where we want to be, and important areas like education, jobs, and industry. First speaking will be Kenneth Darga. Mr. Darga is to my left, is the former state demographer for Michigan. He has a 20-year-plus career in demography. In that role, he represented Michigan in the federal state cooperative population estimates and served on their steering committee for methodology. He's the author of 2 books on the census and has advised the Census Bureau on evaluating the accuracy of the census count. Can you still hear me in the back? Okay, good. Following Mr. Darga and Dr. Ballard, we'll have about 20-25 minutes to present. So we're going a little long on our presentations, but I think you'll find it really interesting. I know it'll hold your attention. Following, as I said, following Mr. Darga will be Charles Ballard. Dr. Ballard joined the MSU Department of Economics at Michigan State University just after receiving his PhD from Stanford University. And outside of teaching, he directs the State of the State Survey. Who here has heard of the State of the State Survey? Raise your hand. Good, good. For those who have not heard of it, the State of the State Survey is a statewide survey conducted every quarter to gain insight on what Michigan citizens are thinking about the economy, the job that our elected officials are doing, What are they thinking about Michigan's future? What are they thinking about some of the current issues? So the media keeps a very close watch on the State of the State survey. More information can be found on IPPSR's website if you're interested, because all of that information is public. So Dr. Ballard has authored a couple of books as well. They're focused on Michigan's economic health. Like I said, each will have 20 to 25 minutes to speak, and then when both have presented their points of discussion, we'll open it up for comments and questions from the audience. Allow me to note that the forum is being taped, photographed, and tweeted, so if you wish to refer your colleagues or community members, for some of you elected in the office, to the forum information, you can easily do that by directing them to the website. So, Ken, let's begin.
Well, thank you, Anne Marie and Charlie, for inviting me to speak at the forum today. Now, 1 month after retirement, it is a pleasure to be thinking and speaking about demographics again. Now, in my role as state demographer, I would focus in my presentations on data and try to dodge questions about policy to the extent that I could. Today, my comments will still be focusing on the data, but during the discussion period, I will try to get used to not dodging policy questions reflexively as I have over the past 20 years. I will be talking about 4 topics. I'll talk about income by age, population trends, higher education, and the geography of Greater Detroit. Now, you might look at those topics and think, well, that's kind of an odd collection of topics. What do they have in common? What they have in common is that they all have to do with the challenges that young adults face in post-recession Michigan. So first, income by age. The first thing you'll notice about this chart is that it seems to be upside down. All the bars are pointing downwards instead of up. That is not a good thing. It means that every age group has had a decrease in income, adjusted for inflation, between 2001 and 2011. For teenagers, age 16 to 19, the decrease was 60%. For people in their early 20s, the decrease is almost 50%. Now, these are huge decreases in average earnings over a 10-year period. This generation is not doing nearly as well as previous generations have done in Michigan. So those are the 3 age groups that have had the worst decreases. Well, as you move on, each age group does a little bit better. You know, the people who were hit hardest by the recession were the people who didn't have jobs yet. Well, people who did have jobs, they were hit hard too. Many people lost their jobs. Once you get to people over age 45 or so, you start having age groups that were hit harder by the recession. But then something interesting happens. For people over 55, it looks as if they weren't hit as hard in terms of income. Actually, they were just hit in a more complicated way. A lot of people over age 55 lost their jobs. A lot of people over age 55 had decreases in wages, decreases in hours, just like people in the other age groups. But a lot of people over age 55 ordinarily would be retired. So their income would go from no wage earner income to 0 wages. So a lot of people who would have ordinarily retired, a lot of people who wanted to retire, have been unable to retire because of what happened to the value of their house, what happened to the state of the economy. So you have 2 adverse effects working against each other. You have a loss of jobs decreasing people's earnings, and you have inability to retire increasing people's earnings. So it looks as if this age group wasn't affected very much by the recession, but that's actually a misconception. This age group was affected very strongly, just as other age groups were. This change in income has had a big impact on population trends. You know, that happened during the Great Depression, and it's happening again now. This chart shows Michigan's population from 2000 to 2012. Now, one of the advantages of being retired is that I'm no longer the person who updates this chart. But if I did update this chart, it would extend a little farther in that blue line. So growth is getting a little bit better, but growth is still very slow. Why is Michigan having such slow growth? Well, the first explanation that might come to mind is, well, maybe we're still losing a lot of population because of migration. Well, that's actually not the case. This chart shows the trend in migration from 1961 to 2012. You can see the huge out-migration that Michigan had in the 1980s. You can see another very large out-migration that we had during the one-state recession. Now, once the one-state recession ended, migration has been getting a little bit better each year, and we're now back pretty much to normal. Now, the number of people that we're losing to other states is almost completely offset by the number of people that we're getting from other countries. And we're actually doing a little bit better than average in terms of migration. So why is it that we're still growing more slowly now than we were in the past, even in years when migration was worse? Well, we have to look for the explanation to birth rates. In 2005, the Census Bureau projected population for every state, including the number of births that every state would have. And this is what they projected between 2004 and 2030. So what they thought we would be experiencing now is an echo of the baby boom. A large number of people were born in the 1950s and 1960s. There was an echo of the baby boom when the baby boomers had children. And we're due for another echo of the baby boom when baby boomers have grandchildren. This is what was projected to happen to Michigan's births. This is what actually happened. That same generation that has taken a huge hit in terms of income is also having difficulty forming families, having difficulty affording to have a child. So along with other things happening in society and along with what's happened to the number of young people through migration, we also have young people being unable to afford starting family life in the way that previous generations have. Another way that the younger generation has been hit is through higher education funding. This is national data. It shows what has happened to state higher education appropriations from 1990 to 2013 compared with personal income. Higher education appropriations by states are down by 44% over this time period. That's a huge decrease in the amount of effort that we are making to fund higher education. Well, Michigan is actually doing even worse. Michigan's appropriations per full-time equivalent student in four-year public institutions is the 5th lowest in the nation, only 60% of the national level. Of course, as funding goes down, tuition goes up. From 1984 to 2014, in-state tuition at public four-year colleges has gone up 231% over this 30-year period. Once again, Michigan is doing even worse. Michigan's tuition was the 6th highest in the nation, 30% higher than the national average. So at the same time that the younger generation is taking a huge hit in terms of income, they're also taking a huge hit in terms of the affordability of education. Well, I think that someday Michigan and the rest of the country will come to their senses and start funding higher education again. But I'm still concerned about this generation that has just come through higher education or is coming through higher education now. They're going to spend the rest of their lives paying for other people's education, but no one was paying very much for their education. So I think that we'll need to consider ways of helping people with paying their educational loans, helping people who were unable to obtain an education, be able to obtain financial aid, even if they're beyond the age that financial aid is usually targeted toward. I have some other interesting data to show you on higher education, and that is the trend in the number of young college graduates in Michigan. This chart shows that people in Michigan, young people, these are people in their 20s, are less likely to have college degrees than people who live in other states. 18% in Michigan, almost 21% in other states. Now, why is it that not very many people in Michigan have college degrees? Well, one explanation that might come to mind is that because of this disparity in costs, people from Michigan don't attend college. Well, I'm sure that those higher costs are not helping, and that as time goes on, there will be that effect. But if you look at the next chart, you'll see that Michigan natives are about as likely to get a college degree as natives of other states. 21.0% for Michigan, 20.7% for other states. I haven't computed the statistical confidence interval, but I can tell you that difference is not statistically significant. So the percentage of Michigan natives with college degrees is essentially the same as the percentage for the rest of the nation. So that's not the explanation. Well, another explanation that might come to mind is that people from Michigan get their degrees and then leave the state. Well, that's not the explanation either. This chart shows the percentage of Michigan natives with degrees who are still in the state compared to the percentage of natives of other states who are still in their home state. For Michigan, we still have 60.5% of people born in Michigan who have degrees, compared to 60.1% for the rest of the nation. Again, Michigan seems to be doing a little bit better, but again, the difference is not statistically significant. We have to look for the explanation at the people coming to Michigan, or in this case, the people not coming to Michigan. The people who do come to Michigan are less likely to have degrees than people who move to other states from elsewhere in the U.S. 25% to almost 28%. So this is part of the explanation. People with degrees are not as likely to come to Michigan. No, people who come to Michigan are less likely to have degrees. But the biggest part of the explanation is simply that Michigan does not get very many people from other states. Only 15.4% of Michigan's residents in their 20s come from other states, compared to over 30% for the nation as a whole. Michigan is simply not attracting people from other states, regardless of educational level. Well, what are the reasons for that? Well, a couple of obvious reasons are that Michigan does not have enough jobs, and also Michigan has a reputation for not having enough jobs. Even when we do eventually solve our job problem, our reputation will probably persist. Also, Michigan's flagship city is Detroit, and Detroit has a lot of problems. And as bad as Detroit's problems are, Detroit's reputation for problems is even worse. So that discourages people from moving to Michigan. Now, there's a lot to say about Detroit and its problems. Most of it I will not say, but I will talk about one aspect of Detroit's problems that you might not be aware of. I'll talk about the geography of Greater Detroit and how that impacts the city's financial and demographic situation. I'm sure that you all know that Detroit has huge numbers of vacant houses, huge numbers of vacant lots. You also probably know that Detroit has only about half as many people as it was designed for. Something that you might not know is that Detroit is still one of the nation's most densely populated cities. Even with its huge tracts of vacant land, even with all of its abandoned lots and abandoned houses, Detroit still has more people per square mile than most other American cities. This chart shows all 33 of the cities with over 500,000 people, and only 1/3 of them have higher population density than Detroit. A lot of the nation's big cities have much lower population density than Detroit. So what's going on here? A comparison among cities seems to be a simple apples-to-apples comparison, but it really isn't. Cities are actually mixed fruits. Out of the 33 cities with more than 500,000 residents, 23, or 70%, have more land area than Detroit. Some of them have 2 times, 3 times, 5 times as much land area as Detroit. 16 of these cities, 48%, have more than twice the land area of Detroit, and 21, or 64%, have lower population density than Detroit. In Michigan, most larger cities are surrounded by newer and more prosperous suburbs. I've gotten used to thinking of a city as a place with old housing, declining economy, and suburbs are the place where you go to find economic growth and a vibrant business district. But that's not the way it is in most of the country. Elsewhere, a majority of cities either started out having a lot of vacant land. Many cities started out the size of counties, or else cities have been able to annex land as it becomes developed. A majority of large cities, and smaller cities as well, essentially contain many of their own suburbs. What we think of as suburbs in Michigan, much of that land is typically within the city limits elsewhere in the US. So for Michigan cities, the tax base declines as urban sprawl takes people beyond the city limits. In Lansing, for example, most of the big shopping centers are just outside the city limits. There's the Eastwood Mall, Meridian Mall, Lansing Mall, Frandor Mall. Saginaw Street has a vibrant shopping district once you get outside the city limits. But within the city, there's much less commercial activity. So as urban sprawl is taking place, whether it's in Lansing or Detroit or another Michigan city, that urban sprawl is taking people outside the city limits. It's reducing the city's tax base. Well, that doesn't happen elsewhere. Other cities have urban sprawl too, but much of that urban sprawl takes place within the city limits, so it doesn't affect the tax base in the same way. In Michigan cities, the incentive grows year by year for businesses and individuals to leave the city to escape the city's legacy costs. The city of Detroit has the legacy costs of a city, twice its size, and as businesses, as individuals leave the city, those legacy costs get more burdensome for the people who are left. People can escape their share of the legacy costs by moving outside the city limits to a community that doesn't have legacy costs yet, to a community that still has low tax rates. As a result, the urban cores decay while the outer ring of suburbs prospers. And from a data standpoint, Michigan cities look much worse than they should in comparison to more typical cities elsewhere. When you compare a Michigan city to a comparably sized city elsewhere, you're comparing a city that excludes its healthy urban fringe to a city elsewhere where the urban fringe is likely to be within the city limits. Well, this also has implications for young adults. People who move to Michigan cities take on financial burdens that really should not be theirs. A young person who moves to Detroit or to another Michigan city is taking on a share of legacy costs that was not incurred for their benefit. So they pay the city's legacy costs, and they also have to live in a city that can't afford basic services because of its legacy costs. As a result, Michigan cities do not attract very many people from other states. That, I believe, is a big reason why Michigan has so few migrants from other states, one of the big reasons why Michigan's population growth is so slow. Now this chart, it looks like Greenland, but it's actually the Detroit urbanized area. One of the types of geographic area that the Census Bureau defines is called an urbanized area. It ignores city limits. It's based on land use patterns. So urbanized areas provide a very good basis for comparing urban areas to one another, much better than comparing cities themselves, because city boundaries can be drawn in such different ways. Now, I won't go into it as part of my prepared remarks, but if you look at your handout, you can see some slides that look at how Detroit compares to other big cities. Often, Detroit is dead last among big cities, but the urbanized area actually does much better. The only area the only variable in the profile where the Detroit urbanized area was dead last was median house value. Well, that's a bad thing if you're selling, but it's a good thing if you're buying. And one area where the Greater Detroit was best in the country was home ownership. For a lot of variables, Greater Detroit actually came within the middle percentiles. So if you compare Detroit to other cities in an unfair comparison, comparing Detroit to cities that contain their urban fringe, contain many of their suburbs, Detroit usually comes out dead last. But if you make a fair comparison, comparing Greater Detroit with other urbanized areas around the country, Greater Detroit actually looks like a typical urbanized area. So in summary, I've talked about 4 areas in which young adults face very serious challenges in the aftermath of the latest recession. They are suffering from low income. They are having difficulty forming families, getting their start in life. They have been hit by high education costs, and they are penalized when they move to Michigan cities. Thank you.